Ladies and gentlemen, let me talk to you for a moment about something that's not always easy to do. Something that challenges us, pushes us, stretches us, and if we allow it, transforms us. It's called letting go and trusting God. You see, life has a way of testing us. It throws curveballs when we least expect it. Plans fall apart. People let us down. And in those moments, we want to hold on to control, to fix, to make it all right. But sometimes holding on is the very thing that keeps us from the peace and purpose we're seeking. Now, let me tell you something. Trusting God doesn't mean we sit back and do nothing. It doesn't mean we give up on working hard or pursuing our dreams. Trusting God means we put the effort in, but we leave the results to Him. It's about knowing deep in your heart that no matter how chaotic things look on the surface, there's a plan greater than your own at work. When you let go, you make room for God to step in. And trust me, when He steps in, He brings clarity where there's confusion. He brings peace where there's anxiety. He brings strength where there's weakness. But here's the catch: letting go requires humility. It means admitting we don't have all the answers. It means surrendering our pride, our fears, our need to control. It's saying, God, I can't do this on my own, but I know you can. And that, my friends, is where the breakthrough begins. You might be facing a storm right now. Maybe it's a relationship, a job, a health issue, or just the weight of the world pressing down on you. But here's the good news: storms don't last forever. And while you're in it, God is working. Even when you can't see it. Even when it doesn't feel like it. I'm not saying it's easy. Letting go takes faith, it takes courage, it takes patience. But remember, this faith isn't about seeing the whole staircase. It's about taking that first step, trusting that God will guide the next one. So what do you need to let go of today? What's weighing you down? What's keeping you up at night? Whatever it is, lay it down, surrender it, and trust that the one who made the heavens and the earth, the one who knows you better than you know yourself, is working all things together for your good. Let go of the fear. Let go of the doubt. Let go of the past. And trust God with your future. Because when you do, you'll find that His plans are better than anything you could ever imagine. Walk in faith, my friends. And let God do what only He can do. Letting go opens the door for God to work. Releasing control allows God to step in and bring clarity, peace, and strength to your situation. Trusting God means surrendering outcomes. Work hard and do your part, but trust that God will handle the results according to His perfect plan. Humility is essential for letting go. Letting go requires admitting you don't have all the answers and surrendering pride, fear, and the need to control. Faith is taking the first step. Trust doesn't require seeing the full picture. It's about moving forward, knowing God will guide each step. Storms are temporary, but God is permanent. Life's challenges don't last forever, and even in the midst of them, God is working behind the scenes. God's plans are greater than ours. Trusting God with your future leads to a life that's better and more fulfilling than you could imagine on your own. Letting go opens the door for God to work in ways we can't even imagine. Often we find ourselves holding on to situations, relationships, or plans so tightly that we leave no room for divine intervention. We convince ourselves that if we just work harder, think smarter, or try a little longer, we can fix what's broken or achieve what we desire. But the truth is, our grip on life's challenges sometimes becomes the very thing that blocks us from experiencing the fullness of God's power. Letting go is not about giving up, it's about surrendering. It's about acknowledging our limitations and recognizing that we don't have to do it all alone. We live in a world that glorifies self-reliance, where independence is seen as strength and asking for help as weakness. But God's ways are different. He doesn't call us to shoulder life's burdens by ourselves. Instead, He invites us to cast our cares on Him because He cares deeply for us. When we let go, we create space for God to show up and do what only He can do. It's like unclenching our fists. As long as our hands are tightly gripped, we can't receive the blessings, peace, or solutions that God has in store for us. Letting go isn't passive, it's active faith. It's saying, God, I trust you more than I trust myself. I believe that you have a plan even when I can't see it. I believe that you're working even when I don't feel it. This surrender doesn't mean that the challenges instantly disappear. It doesn't mean that life becomes easy or that answers come overnight. What it does mean is that we shift the weight from our shoulders to God's. It means that instead of carrying anxiety, we carry trust. Instead of striving endlessly, we rest in the knowledge that God is in control. Think about the story of Moses leading the Israelites out of Egypt. When they reached the Red Sea with Pharaoh's army closing in behind them, there seemed to be no way forward. Panic set in, and the people questioned why they had even left Egypt. But Moses, trusting in God's power, didn't try to figure it out on his own. He stood firm and trusted God to make a way. And God did. He parted the waters, creating a path where there was none. That moment didn't happen because of human effort. It happened because someone let go of fear and control and trusted God to act. Letting go also requires patience. Sometimes we let go of a problem and expect immediate results, only to find that God's timing is not our timing. In those moments, it's easy to feel frustrated or to want to take control again. But letting go means trusting that God's timing is perfect even when it feels slow to us. He sees the bigger picture, the one we can't see, and His plans for us are always for good, even when we don't understand the path He's taking us on. There's something freeing about letting go. It doesn't mean the absence of responsibility, but it does mean the absence of unnecessary stress. It means waking up each day and doing your best while leaving the outcomes to God. It means trusting that the same God who created the universe is intimately concerned with the details of your life. When you let go, you're not losing control, you're gaining peace. You're allowing God to work in your life in ways that go beyond human ability. And in doing so, you discover a strength that doesn't come from your efforts, but from His grace. Letting go is not an act of weakness, it's an act of faith. And in that faith, God moves mountains. Trusting God means surrendering the outcomes of our efforts to Him. And that's a powerful act of faith. So often, we are conditioned to believe that every result in our lives depends entirely on what we do. We're taught to hustle harder, plan better, and strategize endlessly, as if the only factor determining success is our effort. But there's a deeper truth at work. While our actions matter, the outcomes are ultimately in God's hands. Trusting God isn't about abandoning our responsibilities or refusing to take action. It's about understanding the balance between human effort and divine providence. We are called to give our best, to work with diligence and integrity, but then to let go of the need to control every detail of the results. That's where trust comes in. It's believing that no matter how things turn out, God's plan is better than anything we could orchestrate on our own. This kind of trust is liberating because it removes the pressure to achieve perfection. When we feel that every result depends entirely on us, we carry a weight we were never meant to bear. The fear of failure can paralyze us, making us hesitate to take risks or pursue the paths God has placed before us. But when we surrender the outcomes to God, we free ourselves from that burden. We're able to step forward in faith, knowing that success is not defined by worldly standards, but by our obedience to His will. Think about a farmer planting seeds. The farmer does the work of tilling the soil, planting the seeds, and watering the crops, but he cannot control the weather or guarantee the harvest. He has to trust that nature, under God's guidance, will do its part. In the same way, we're responsible for planting seeds in our lives, putting in the effort, making wise choices, and taking steps toward our goals. But we cannot control every variable. Trusting God means doing our part, and then releasing the rest to Him. This principle is beautifully illustrated in the story of Peter walking on water. When Jesus called Peter out of the boat, Peter stepped onto the waves in faith. But as he walked, he began to focus on the wind and the waves, and fear crept in. He started to sink because he lost sight of the one who had called him. Trusting God means keeping our eyes on Him, even when the storms of life rage around us. It's about believing that if He called us to it, He will see us through it. Surrendering outcomes to God also requires us to trust His character. God is not a distant, indifferent deity. He is a loving Father who desires the best for His children. Sometimes we struggle to trust because we're afraid that what we want and what God wants for us might not align. But God's plans are always rooted in His love and wisdom. What He has in store for us is far greater than anything we could plan for ourselves, even if it doesn't look the way we expected. There are times when we don't understand why certain things happen. Prayers may seem unanswered, doors may close, and plans may fall apart. In those moments, it's tempting to take matters into our own hands, to try to force outcomes according to our desires. But trusting God means believing that even in disappointment, He is working for our good. Sometimes the very thing we think is a setback is a setup for something far greater than we could imagine. When we surrender outcomes to God, we also gain a sense of peace that can't be shaken by circumstances. We no longer tie our sense of worth or success to what happens, but instead anchor it in God's faithfulness. That peace allows us to move through life with confidence and joy, knowing that no matter what comes our way, God is in control. Trusting Him doesn't make life easier, but it does make it infinitely more meaningful, because we know that every step is guided by His loving hand. Humility is at the very heart of letting go and trusting God. It's the realization that we are not the masters of our own fate, nor are we equipped to navigate life's complexities on our own. In a world that often equates strength with independence and control, humility stands as a quiet, yet profound act of courage. It requires us to admit that we don't have all the answers, and that's okay, because we serve a God who does. Humility starts with acknowledging our limitations. As human beings, we are finite in our understanding, abilities, and perspective. We see only a small fragment of the bigger picture, while God sees it all. When we try to hold on to control, it's as though we're saying we know better than the one who created us. But humility reminds us of our position not as creators, but as the created. It shifts our focus from self-reliance to God-reliance, which is where true strength is found. This kind of humility doesn't come easily. It's not natural to admit our weaknesses or to let go of the pride that whispers, "You can do this on your own." We are taught to solve problems, to be self-sufficient, and to push forward no matter the cost. But when we approach life with this mindset, we often end up drained, anxious, and defeated. Humility, on the other hand, invites us to step back and say, "God, I can't do this without you." That simple admission opens the door for His power to work in and through us. Think about how a child approaches a parent when they need help. A child doesn't come with a detailed plan or a sense of shame for not knowing what to do. They simply trust that their parent will provide. That's the essence of humility before God. It's coming to Him not with all the answers, but with an open heart, ready to receive His guidance and provision. And just like a loving parent, God is always ready to step in when we let go of our need to control. Humility also requires letting go of pride, and pride is a stubborn thing. Pride tells us that we should be able to handle everything on our own, that asking for help is a sign of weakness. But the Bible is clear: God opposes the proud but gives grace to the humble, James 4:6. Pride builds walls between us and God, while humility tears them down. When we humble ourselves, we position our hearts to receive His grace, wisdom, and strength. This isn't to say that humility means thinking less of ourselves or diminishing our worth. True humility is not self-deprecation, it's accurate self-awareness. It's recognizing that our value doesn't come from our achievements or our ability to control outcomes, but from the fact that we are deeply loved by God. When we understand that, we no longer have to prove ourselves. We can rest in His love and trust Him with the details of our lives. Another aspect of humility is surrendering our expectations. Often we cling to specific outcomes because we think we know what's best. But humility acknowledges that God's ways are higher than our ways, and His thoughts are higher than our thoughts, Isaiah 55:9. It's saying, "God, even if things don't go the way I want, I trust that your plan is better." That kind of surrender requires profound humility, but it leads to an unshakable peace. Humility also creates space for gratitude. When we stop striving to control everything, we begin to see God's hand at work in ways we might have overlooked. We recognize that every good thing in our lives is a gift from Him, not something we've earned or achieved on our own. This gratitude deepens our trust and strengthens our relationship with Him. Humility is not just a posture of the heart, it's a daily practice. It's choosing, moment by moment, to lay down our pride, our fears, and our need to control. It's saying, "God, I trust you with this, and I trust you with me." And in that place of humility, we find the freedom, strength, and peace that only He can give. Faith is often described as the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. It's the ability to trust in something greater than ourselves, even when we can't see the outcome or understand the process. This is especially true when we talk about taking that first step, a step of faith that requires us to move forward, trusting that God will guide us even if the path ahead is unclear. Faith is not about having all the answers, it's about being willing to step out, believing that God will provide what's needed along the way. Taking the first step in faith can be one of the most challenging things we do. It requires us to confront our fears and doubts, the voices in our heads that say, "What if I fail? What if I'm wrong? What if things don't work out? But faith silences those voices with a quiet assurance that God is in control, that He is faithful, and that He will never leave us or forsake us. It's not about knowing every detail of the journey, it's about trusting the one who does. Think of Abraham, who was called by God to leave his home, his family, and everything familiar to go to a land that God would show him. Abraham didn't have a map, a timeline, or even a clear destination. What he had was faith that God would guide him step by step. And because of that faith, Abraham became the father of nations, a central figure in God's plan for humanity. His story reminds us that sometimes the only thing we're given is the call to take the first step, and that's enough when God is leading. Faith is not passive, it's active. It's moving forward even when you don't have all the details. Imagine a foggy road where you can only see a few feet ahead of you. Each step reveals a little more of the path, but you won't see the next part until you take that first step. That's how faith works. God doesn't always show us the entire plan because He wants us to trust Him, not the plan. He wants us to depend on Him, not our own understanding. This kind of trust requires a willingness to let go of control. We like to plan, to analyze, to prepare for every possible outcome. But faith asks us to step forward, even when the plan is incomplete. It's about saying, God, I don't see the whole picture, but I know you do. I don't have all the answers, but I know you do. I'm stepping out not because I'm confident in myself, but because I'm confident in you. That's the essence of faith, confidence in God's character, His promises, and His faithfulness. Faith is also a discipline. It's not a one-time decision, but a daily choice to trust God in the small things and the big things. Each step of faith builds on the last, strengthening our trust in Him. When we take that first step, we often find that God meets us in ways we didn't expect. He provides resources, connections, and opportunities that we couldn't have anticipated. But we won't experience these blessings if we're too afraid to take that first step. Fear often stands in the way of faith. It tells us to stay where it's safe, where it's comfortable, where we're in control. But faith challenges us to step out of the boat, like Peter did when Jesus called him to walk on water. Peter didn't stay in the safety of the boat, he stepped out in faith. And as long as his eyes were on Jesus, he did the impossible. It's only when he focused on the wind and the waves that he began to sink. That story teaches us that faith isn't about ignoring challenges, it's about keeping our focus on God, who is greater than any challenge. Faith doesn't guarantee an easy journey, but it does guarantee that we're not alone. When we take that first step, we invite God to walk with us, to guide us, and to strengthen us. Each step is a declaration that we trust Him more than we trust our fears, our doubts, or our need to have everything figured out. And in that trust, we find the courage to keep moving forward, knowing that God will provide the light we need one step at a time. Storms are a part of life. They come in many forms: financial difficulties, broken relationships, health challenges, loss, or uncertainty about the future. These storms can leave us feeling shaken, overwhelmed, and vulnerable, as if we're navigating through darkness without a compass. But here's the truth: we need to hold on to. Storms are temporary, but God is permanent. No matter how fierce or relentless the storm may seem, it will not last forever. And even while we're in the midst of it, God is at work. The nature of storms is that they feel consuming. They demand our attention, making it difficult to see anything beyond the chaos. In those moments, it's easy to lose sight of God's promises and to feel as though we're alone in the struggle. But the Bible is full of reminders that God is present in the storm. One of the most powerful images of this is found in Mark 4:35-41, when Jesus and His disciples were caught in a violent storm on the Sea of Galilee. The disciples panicked, convinced they were about to drown. Meanwhile, Jesus was asleep in the boat. When they woke Him, crying out for help, Jesus calmed the storm with a simple command: peace, be still. That moment is a profound reminder that no storm is too great for God. He is not unaware of our struggles, nor is He distant or disengaged. Sometimes it may feel like He's silent, like He's sleeping while we're battling the waves. But His silence does not mean absence, and His timing is always perfect. Just as He calmed the sea for the disciples, He has the power to bring peace to the storms in our lives. But here's the key: God doesn't always calm the storm immediately. Sometimes He allows us to go through it, not to harm us, but to grow us. Storms test our faith and strengthen our dependence on Him. They strip away our illusions of control and remind us of our need for a Savior. In the process, they refine us, shaping our character and drawing us closer to God. It's in the storm that we learn to trust Him more deeply, to rely on His strength rather than our own. Storms also have a way of revealing God's faithfulness. Think back to times in your life when you faced challenges that seemed insurmountable. You may not have seen it at the time, but looking back, you can often see how God was at work providing, guiding, and sustaining you through it all. He's the same God now as He was then, and He will continue to be faithful in whatever storm you're facing today. Another important truth is that storms often prepare us for what's ahead. They teach us resilience, compassion, and a greater awareness of God's presence. Joseph's story in the Bible is a perfect example of this. Betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused and imprisoned, Joseph endured one storm after another. But through it all, God was working. Those storms prepared Joseph to step into his purpose as a leader who would save countless lives during a famine. What felt like setbacks were, in fact, setups for something greater. In the middle of a storm, it can be hard to see beyond the immediate struggle. But storms don't last forever. Seasons change, and with them, the storms pass. What remains constant is God's presence and His promises. He is the anchor that holds firm when the winds rage and the waves crash. His word is a steady compass, guiding us through the uncertainty, and His love is a shelter, protecting us from being consumed by the storm. When we face life's storms, the question is not whether God is with us, He is always with us. The question is whether we will trust Him in the storm. Will we hold on to His promises, even when we can't see the outcome? Will we rest in His peace, knowing that He is in control? Because when we do, we find that even in the fiercest storms, we can experience a peace that surpasses all understanding, a peace that only comes from knowing that God is greater than any storm we face. God's timing is perfect even when it doesn't align with our own. This truth can be one of the most challenging aspects of faith because as human beings, we live in a world driven by schedules, deadlines, and instant gratification. When we pray or hope for something, we often expect results on our timeline. But God operates outside of time as we understand it, and His plans unfold according to His divine wisdom. Trusting His timing means learning to wait, to be patient, and to believe that He knows what's best even when waiting is hard. Waiting on God's timing doesn't mean doing nothing. It's not a passive act, but an active demonstration of faith. It's about continuing to pray, to trust, and to prepare while letting go of the need to force outcomes. Often in the waiting, God is doing something within us. He's building our character, strengthening our faith, and preparing us for what's to come. The delay isn't a denial, it's a divine opportunity for growth. Consider the story of Joseph in the Bible. As a young man, Joseph received dreams from God, visions of greatness and leadership. But those dreams didn't come to fruition overnight. Instead, Joseph endured years of hardship, being sold into slavery by his brothers, falsely accused and imprisoned. From the outside, it might have seemed like God had forgotten him or that His promises had failed. But all along, God was working. Through those difficult years, Joseph was being prepared for his ultimate purpose. When the time was right, Joseph was elevated to a position of power, and his leadership saved countless lives during a famine. Looking back, it's clear that God's timing was perfect, even though it may have seemed slow or uncertain in the moment. God's timing is also about protecting us. Sometimes we want something so badly that we're willing to rush ahead without realizing the consequences. But God, in His infinite wisdom, sees what we cannot. He knows when we're ready for the blessings we desire and when we need more time to grow or to prepare. Delays can be God's way of protecting us from stepping into something prematurely or from situations that could harm us. Waiting on God's timing can also be an act of trust in His promises. Abraham and Sarah experienced this firsthand. God promised them a child, but years went by with no sign of that promise being fulfilled. In their impatience, they tried to take matters into their own hands, leading to complications and heartache. Yet in the end, God's promise was fulfilled in His timing, with the birth of Isaac. Their story reminds us that when we try to rush God's plan, we often create more challenges for ourselves. But when we trust Him, we see the beauty of His perfect timing. One of the most comforting aspects of God's timing is that it is never too early or too late. It may feel like things are taking longer than they should, but God is always right on time. This can be hard to accept when we're waiting for a breakthrough, healing, or resolution. In those moments, it's important to remember that God's delays are not his denials. He hasn't forgotten us or ignored our prayers. He's working behind the scenes, aligning circumstances and preparing us for the blessings to come. The process of waiting teaches us to rely on God. It strips away our illusion of control and reminds us of our dependence on him. It cultivates patience, perseverance, and a deeper faith. When we finally see the fulfillment of what we've been waiting for, it's often accompanied by a greater appreciation for God's faithfulness and a stronger relationship with him. Ultimately, trusting God's timing requires surrender. It's about saying, God, I trust you enough to let go of my own timeline. I believe that your ways are higher than mine and that your plans for me are good. In doing so, we find peace even in the waiting. We learn to rest in the assurance that God's timing is perfect, not just for the circumstances around us, but for the growth and transformation happening within us. His timing isn't just about fulfilling our desires, it's about shaping us into the people he created us to be. And when the time is right, his plan will unfold in ways that exceed anything we could imagine. In life's journey, let go and trust God. Surrender your fears, embrace humility, take steps in faith, endure the storms, and trust his perfect timing. He is always faithful, always present, and his plans are greater than anything we could imagine. Rest in him, and he will guide you to peace, purpose, and fulfillment.